Hello, in this lesson, I will be demonstrating how to create an etcd cluster. So what we need to do is we need to install and configure etcd on both of our two controller nodes. And I've got my 5 cloud servers set up. And you may remember that I'm using my first 2 cloud servers to be my Kubernetes controllers, and I need to install and configure etcd on both of these servers. So I'm going to go ahead and get logged into my servers, and I'm going to copy the public IP of my first controller here. And I'm going to come over here and log in, and I have my terminal configured with 2 side-by-side windows so that I can show you what I'm doing in both of the servers simultaneously. So I'm going to go ahead and get logged in. And then I'm going to come back here and I'll copy the public IP address of my second controller, and I'll log into that over here on the right. Now we're going to be doing a lot of the same things for both of these servers. So if you're following along and you have the ability to use something like tmux or multi-exec in order to enter the same commands simultaneously across both windows, feel free to use that. Just know there are going to be a few commands that need to be different between the 2 servers, so keep an eye out for those and make sure that you don't accidentally enter the same thing for both. I'm going to just be showing you how to do it separately because not everyone has a setup that allows them to use tmux or multi-exec. So I'm just going to go ahead and run the commands manually in both windows. Now you may want to check the description below this video because down there you will be able to find a list of all the commands that I'm going to be running. So especially some of these long commands, you may want to just copy and paste them from the description down below rather than manually typing them out. So I'm going to go ahead and clear the screen. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to download the etcd binaries. So I'm just going to use this wget command, and that's just going to download this etcd tar.gz archive. And once I've downloaded the binaries, I need to go ahead and extract that archive. So I'm just going to extract this archive file that I just downloaded. And then I'm going to take the contents of that archive that I just extracted, and I'm going to move them into the correct place. So I'm going to run this sudo mv command to go ahead and move my executables into user/local/bin. And of course, I need to authenticate that sudo command. Next, I'm going to create a couple directories that I need in order to run etcd. So I'm going to create etc/etcd and var_lib etcd. And again, I'm doing all these commands on both servers. Then I need to move my certificate files into the correct location. So I'm going to go ahead and do an ls. And you may remember in some of the previous lessons in this course, we generated these key files and certificate files and also these kubeconfig files, and we actually uploaded them to these servers. So you can actually see here the files that we uploaded to these controller servers in some of the previous lessons. And we're going to be copying a few of these files into certain locations so that etcd can use them. So I'm going to run this cp command, and we're going to copy ca.pem, that's our certificate authority, then my Kubernetes certificate key, and my Kubernetes certificate.pem. And I'm going to be moving those, or copying them, into /etc/etcd. And it's going to be a copy because later on in this course, we're going to need additional copies of these files. So we want to leave a copy back here in the home directory for now, and we're going to go ahead and just copy them into the proper location for etcd, because etcd is going to be using those files. Now I need to create the systemd unit file for etcd, and in order to make that a little easier, I'm going to take some of the values that need to go into that unit file and I'm going to set them to environment variables. And these variables are just going to be temporary. They're just going to be used for the purposes of creating the unit file. And the first one I'm going to set is going to be called etcd_name. And I'm going to set this to something different on both of these servers. It cannot be the same value because the etcd name is the unique name of each node in the etcd cluster. So each one of these nodes needs its own unique name. And just to keep things somewhat simple and straightforward, I'm going to make the etcd name match my public host names. So my first server is wboyd1.mylabserver.com. I'm just going to copy that entire public host name, and I'll paste that there and set that variable. And then I will take the public host name for my second server, and that's going to be my etcd name for the second server. That'll just make those servers a little easier to identify because that etcd name just matches the host name, and we automatically know which server that is. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set the internal IP of each one of these servers. And this variable contains the internal IP for each server that it's on. So over here on the left, this is going to be the internal IP of this server. And over here on the right, it's going to be set to the internal IP of my second controller server. Now, the internal IP is simply this private IP value right here. But I'm just going to use a little bit of a trick. Because these cloud servers are actually Amazon EC2 instances, I can also get that private IP value from this call to the Amazon Web Services API. So I'm going to go ahead and run that. And if I echo the value of this, you can see 172.31, 121.48. It's actually the same as this private IP. And of course, over here on the right, it's not going to be the same value as it is on the left. This variable is intended to contain a reference to each server's respective private IP address. So I'm going to go ahead and set up one more environment variable, and I'm going to call this variable initial_cluster. And the initial cluster is basically a list of all the servers in the etcd cluster. And this list needs to be accurate because if it's not, then even if we install and run etcd, the cluster will not form correctly and our two nodes will not communicate with each other correctly using etcd. So we need to go ahead and set this variable, and it's going to be the same for both servers. So I'm going to set it over here on the left, and then I'll copy and paste it over on the right when we're done. And what I need to set this to is I need to start off with the etcd name of my first server. And of course, that's still right here. It's going to be that etcd_name. So I'm going to provide the name of that first server. And then I'm going to put an equal sign. And now I need to enter the etcd URL for that server. So it's the name equals the URL. So the URL is going to be https:// and then I need to enter the internal IP of this first server in the cluster. So I'm going to go back here and I'm going to copy this private IP. That's my internal IP for wboyd1, which is my first cluster node. So I'm going to go ahead and just paste that in. Then I need to enter the port. So I'm going to put a :2380. And again, check the description below the video because you can find this command down there where you can just kind of substitute in the placeholders for each one of these values. And then I need to put a comma because this, again, is a comma delimited list of all the servers in my cluster. So now I'm ready to enter the information for the second server. So now I need to enter the etcd name of the second server. So I'm just going to copy that from over here on the right. You could also copy it again from your host name over here. And I'll go ahead and just paste that in. Then I'll put another equal sign, and now I'm ready to enter the URL for that second server. So that's going to be https://. And now I need to enter that second private IP. So I'm going to copy that, paste that in, Again, it's :2380. And I'm done setting this initial cluster variable. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. And then I'll just copy this entire command and paste it over here so that both of these servers have a reference to that initial cluster variable. So again, just to make sure this is accurate, because if this variable's not set correctly, your cluster's not going to form properly. It's set to the first etcd name equals the first etcd URL with the private IP of my first server, and then comma the second etcd name, and of course the URL for the second server with its private IP address. So now I've set up all of my environment variables, and I'm ready to go ahead and create my unit file. And this is another one of those commands that you're probably going to want to just copy and paste from the description to the video, because it's a long command. And what I'm doing is I'm creating a file, etc/systemd/system/etcd.service. This is just a normal systemd unit file that's going to create a Linux service for etcd. And I've entered the command in both of my servers because it's the same command, but you'll notice there's references to these environment variables, some of which have different values for each server. So the output of this file is actually going to be different for each server. So we've got the etcd name being defined there. We've got several references to each server's internal IP. And then, of course, we have that initial cluster value that we set up. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. And if it's still not clear what exactly is going on here, you may get a little more clarity by seeing the final output. As you can see, we have the actual etcd name now, wboid1, and over here, it's wboid2. And then each server has its own IP address. So this one is 121.48 and 28.244. And then, of course, that long list that we created earlier in both servers. So that's our unit file for systemd, and we're ready to go ahead and start up our etcd service. The first thing we need to do is we need to do a systemctl daemon reload. We have to do that anytime we modify a unit file or add a new unit file, just to make sure that systemd sees all those new changes. Then we're going to do a sudo systemctl enable etcd. That's going to enable the etcd service, which means that it will start up automatically every time our server starts up. And finally, we can do a sudo systemctl start etcd, and that's going to go ahead and start up the etcd service. So our etcd service should be starting up now. Just to make sure everything's okay, I'm going to do a sudo systemctl status etcd. And it looks like it's running okay based on that output, but there's one other command that I want to run to make sure that our cluster is forming properly. And again, you can find this command in the description. And I don't actually need to run this on both servers, but I'm going to run it on both anyway. And what I'm doing is I'm using etcdctl to get a list of all my etcd nodes. And here's my output. And as you can see, I've got two lines. The first line is my first server, and the second line is my second server. So the fact that I have both of my nodes showing up properly in this output shows me that my etcd cluster has been formed correctly. And I've now successfully installed and configured etcd, and my two servers are communicating with each other as part of an etcd cluster. So I've got etcd installed and ready for me to install Kubernetes.